Don't buy this game. Anything else? And everything else I could tell you could be summarized by that one sentence. Don't buy this game. I have notes to try and waste as little of your time as possible. Let's start with the dialogue. So, I've been analyzing and reviewing fiction for the better part of 12 years now. It's interesting because while I mock and deride and make fun of quite a few things for having what I call bad writing in various respects, there's usually at least an asterisk attached there. And there's always a gradient as well in terms of quality. I say this because I want you to understand that I do not speak with hyperbole when I say that this is the worst dialogue I've ever seen in a game. I have seen badly localized JRPGs that have better dialogue than this. And I want to try and explain some of the specifics, because it was so bad that I had to sit and process for the better part of an hour, just pause the game in midstream and really chew on it to understand what the hell was going on with this dialogue. And there's 3 huge issues with it. Well, 4. Well, 20. But the biggest one, first of all, is what we usually call first pass writing. It's very, very common for a writer to write out essentially filler dialogue, filler text, and then to go back in editing and kind of refine it and polish it up and do all of the things that make good dialogue good. By the way, I apologize for my throat. I'm still recovering from sick, but I wanted to get all this out while this is all still fresh in my mind. So I'm sorry. My voice sucks. I suck. Moving on. Mea culpa. Now, so first pass writing is when you can so clearly see that for whatever reason, they didn't do the editing pass. They didn't actually sit down and polish the dialogue. They just wrote it and then let that sit and then let the actors read it. Which brings me to my next problem, the actors. You have a lot of talented actors in this game. Many of them are completely wasted in either one-off roles or things where they're barely present within the narrative. And near as I could tell, none of them got any voice direction. Speaking as a voice director, I could say with rather certainty that most of these people were not told the context of their lines or the situation or environment of their lines or the intonation or the pronunciation or anything. So a lot of these sound like line readings. In other words, you just reading the lines from the page, right? Because what else are you going to do? And the other thing, of course, is a lot of these sound like they just don't really know what they're doing. So their tone is wrong, or even when they're trying to emote, you can kind of tell where they're pausing unnaturally in their dialogue because they're trying to understand what's happening as they're reading it. Which also, to me, indicates that we've got 2 problems here. First of all, a near total absence of voice direction, which I already mentioned, but second of all, they probably only had the one take. And you're probably thinking, what's that doing? Well, hear me out for a second. If I fire out, I've got 4 roles, and I need 4 separate actors to voice act these things. And if I fire out 4 packages, 4 scripts to these people and say, hey, record these and get them back to me. That's cheap, that's easy, that's quick, done. You know what's not? Directing those. Because I have to do something, either in written or vocal or in-person format, to reach out to the person and say, here's the direction for your lines. And then when they screw up, because inevitably there will be people who screw up, no judgment, that's life, I will have to then be like, hey, I need a retake on this. Or, could you do this line, but a little bit more this way? Giving that direction, doing those retakes, those additional lines of editing, that takes a lot more time. You have effectively more than doubled your workload simply by adding voice direction. Or you could just fire off the lines and have people record them. So the voice acting is bad, to put it as nicely as I possibly can. But hang on, you're probably wondering, hang on, I thought you were talking about the first pass thing. Well, yeah. The problem with the first pass thing is first pass dialogue is bad. So that has like a knock-on, a domino effect on the voice acting. If you're reading bad dialogue, it's going to sound bad. In fact, actually, it's going to sound worse because it's not natural to you and it's not natural, period. And you don't have the direction necessary to make that pop, assuming that was even possible. So now a bad problem has already gotten worse. Then we have to talk about repetition. There is so much empty text in this game where people talk for long periods of time and say nothing. There's also tremendous amounts of repetition in this game, which I hope you'll understand, because there's tremendous amounts of repetition in this game, because for some reason there's a tremendous amount of repetition in this game. This is not an exaggeration to say that there are several instances in this game where they would repeat a story point 4 times in a row in the space of one conversation. Oftentimes what will happen is they'll only repeat it once. So in other words, 2 iterations of the same information. Then you'll go talk to the next NPC in the quest, who will then tell you the same information a 3rd time. So there's a lot of bloat, a lot of bad dialogue, a lot of bad acting. But what really, really shines here, what really helped me zoom in on all this, is I could say all these things, but you know one of the worst ways the dialogue in this game is? There's some good dialogue right there. Everybody has the exact same voice. On the off chance I need to explain that, when writing, people have different voices. And it is a skill, is a talent to write 2 different characters who read differently, even if there's no actors or performers performing it. The lines on the page need to be different because different people do have different voices. We use different sentence structure. We have different intonation and cadence into how we pronounce our words, and we have different word utilization. We have different vocabularies that we use. Even those 3 very, very basic things leads to stuff that can be written, that can be there just in text. It's something that I push a lot. In fact, I've talked about this even with regards to my Star Trek stuff years and years and years ago when I was still doing the Star Trek videos, is that there are times when you could tell that a character is actually just written to be another character, but they brought in a new actor for them. Because it's the same voice. If you divorce the performance and just look at the lines on the page, they're identical. The problem is, everyone has the same voice in this game. Every NPC talks with, well, that's a slight exaggeration. There's like 5 NPCs out of hundreds. So the hundreds of NPCs have the same voice. They all speak in the same cadence, with the same sentence structure, with the same word choice. And between the similarities in the dialogue and the bad dialogue itself because of the first pass problem, and the voice acting and voice direction problem, and the repetition problem, it gets to the point where it all becomes this big, blackish, grayish mass. It's like a giant thing of silly putty that there's no definition to it, and you just start blanking it out. I have reached several points during this game where I had trouble understanding what I was doing because I realized I had been blanking out so hard on what the characters were saying. I had many instances where I had viewers pop in and say, "I'm sorry, I missed all that," or "I was just not listening to that particular thing because despite hearing words, I didn't process any of it." It's so vacuous. And forgive me for really hammering this point in, but I'm doing so thoroughly because I want to stress that when I say this is the worst dialogue I've ever seen in a video game, I am not exaggerating. This is Phantom Menace levels of dialogue. And it drags the entire game down because, by God, there's a lot of it. The quest structure doesn't help anything either. It's a fairly typical quest structure for a BRPG. You start at point X, and then you go over here to point Y, and then you go back to point X, and then you go over here to point Z, then you go back to point X, and then you go over here to point A, and then you go back to point X. And that can work, especially if there's stuff to do on the way. Especially if there's things nearby the points that you're going out to. There's ways to design flow and overworld and towns and triggers and events in order to make this kind of quest format work. I know this because I have reviewed Oblivion. For the record, Oblivion is actually one of the only BRPGs I've reviewed. It's Oblivion, Outer Worlds, and Starfield. That's the 3. So don't ask about Fallout New Vegas or Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 or Morrowind. Those are on the books. We'll get there someday. But I can't speak with authority on those, so I'm not going to. But Oblivion I can. Oblivion is not a perfect game. It's actually an extremely flawed game. But at least it understood quest structure. It understood putting a quest in a dungeon which had other things in it, or other things near it, or things on the way to it. There was design put into it. But none of that exists in Starfield by the very nature of the structure of the game. And I hate to keep emphasizing that word. But the whole game is designed around this idea of fast travel teleporting everywhere. One of the biggest complaints I heard back in Oblivion, when Oblivion came out, was that you could fast travel around. Everyone's like, I hate fast travel. I never understood that. Because, well, first of all, I like fast travel, but second of all, because you don't have to. You can just walk if you really want to. In fact, it's even beneficial to do so. And now, having studied Oblivion with more depth, I can say that that's actually one of Oblivion's better marks, is the fact that there's stuff to do if you just go and roam and explore. Hell, that's even true in Skyrim and Fallout 3. But there's no roaming in this game. There's no exploring in this game. There's, well, here's my destination. And if you feel like fast traveling there, you can. Or, hear me out, you can walk through town, big empty town, do a load screen into your ship, walk up, unskippable cutscene of sitting down into your chair, unskippable cutscene of taking off into space. And then you could pull up the map, pull your destination up, hit warp 2, fast travel there, then land your ship, get out of the chair, walk over to the thing, load screen out, and then be there. Or you could just fast travel there. Now, if you want to enjoy the immersion, that's on you, and that's fine. I actually have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is there's no gameplay in the middle of those two events. Going from point A to point B involves a load screen, whether it's 1 or 5 or 10. There's nothing in between. Nothing happens there. And don't get me started on the contraband thing. That absolutely does not count for this. So, in a game where you start here and then go here and then go back and then go forward and then go back and then go forward and go back, and all it is fast travel, all you've done is created bad backtracking, because there's nothing new or interesting or fun about the backtracking itself, and pure padding. That's going to be a trend, by the way. So it's dialogue padding and quest padding. Let's talk about traversal. I kind of already have with the fast travel concept. But traversal in this game sucks. So let's really go down the list here. I did a full 30-minute dissertation of this on stream, so forgive me for trying to give you the truncated version. By the way, I know it's a really long stream. It's like an 80-hour stream, 71-hour stream. If you ever want to study game design or watch a long-form stream about game design, please watch the Starfield stream. This has been one of the most game design streams we have ever done. This game is such a textbook for how not to do game design. We had to pause multiple points and just sit and discuss because of how much they screwed everything up. Speaking of which, there's a stamina bar in this game. Now, that sounds like a weird place to start, and that's probably because it is. But it's important. It's important to understand just how connected these systems are. One of the things I've talked about for years, upon years, upon years, upon years, is that interlocking systems is how games are really good or really bad. Any game can have a good core combat. It's not actually that hard to do, not really. But if you don't have the enemy design to back it up, or the enemy AI to back it up, or the enemy variety to back it up, or the encounter design to back it up, or the level design, or the power progression curve, or the leveling curve, or the difficulty, all of these things, the kit, the itemization, the currency progression. There are so many different aspects that are all connected to fighting things in a video game. Connected systems. Very, very few systems exist in a vacuum when it comes to game design. And there's this domino effect of everything. And if I could give you one really quick preview, Starfield's biggest problem is a lot of people look at it and say, well, this is just kind of bad. And they're right. Most of the things in Starfield are just kind of bad. But every bad thing interlocks with every other bad thing, and they magnify. So everything becomes worse, which makes everything worse, which makes everything worse. So stamina bar. So you go like this, and you can run. It's very slow. Or you can sprint for a few seconds and then pause again. Now, that's nothing new. But you have very limited inventory space. It's weight-based. So if you're overburdened, you go from going to walking, and then occasionally you can go back to run speed and then back to walking speed to recover your stamina. That slows it down, of course. That sucks. But that's not a huge issue. You're just looting too much. All you have to do is go deal with the loot. That's a good point. So how do we deal with loot? Well, there's three main vectors for that, and all of them suck. First is storage, most obvious. Unlike in, I'll use a random example here, Fallout 4, you do not have a proper infinite storage space. Asterisk, there is actually one infinite storage space in the game. It's in the lodge. That infinite storage space is not connected to any other storage. It's not linked. Relevance? That means that it is just a bank, which you cannot access, unlike, say, your ship or your bag, or even some of the stuff on your outpost, which you can access during things like crafting or building. So if you want anything from there, you have to actually go manually go to the lodge, walk, teleport, walk, go get the thing, pull it out, walk, teleport, walk, in order to actually use it. You can see how it's just, the padding is just, it's just everywhere, right? Connecting systems. So you don't have infinite storage, so you have very finite storage. Okay, well, that's kind of weird. In fact, you have worse than finite storage. The storage you can build in Outpost is kind of flimsy, and Outpost, we'll get to that in just a second. But also, the actual size you have on you is pretty crap, and not very upgradable. And the size you have on your ship is extraordinarily limited, and thanks to a couple of bugs, which I'm not even going to get in right now, it's pretty easy to overload that without even noticing. So, it's okay, just upgrade your ship. No problem. Upgrading your ship costs how much? Because you have to spend an inordinate amount of money on upgrading your ship. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to that. Okay, so fine. Storage doesn't work. No problem. I'll just break down the items. There's a crafting system in this game, and there's a building system in this game for building outposts and stuff. So surely you're going to let me break down items into components. Nope. Once again, this is a system that Fallout 4 had. So there's no breaking stuff down into composite components, which then either have less weight or no weight, in order to be able to use them for future crafting and gearing. Again, reminder, those mechanisms exist in this game. There is crafting, there's building. It's just worse than Fallout 4 in every way. I'm getting ahead of myself. Please forgive me. Okay, so breaking down is... So we just sell. So for reasons best known to, I don't know, God himself, because at this point, I don't know who else can actually understand the minds of the developers of this game. Maybe Cthulhu? Hey, Cthulhu! What were they thinking when they made this game? Okay, I'll keep that in mind. The vendors have a money cap again. Hang on. Even a money cap isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is always down to the specifics of how you design it. The average money cap for the people out in the vendor port, aka the most accessible and easy to get to vendors, is 5,000. That's pathetic. Even midway through the game, that's like 2 items sold. What I would got into the habit of doing very, very quickly is going ahead and selling 1 or 2 items and then just holding on to the rest of my crap and moving on. Now, once again, that's still not necessarily bad because there are other vendors, and that money does refill after, I think it's 2 days' time, 1 day or 2 days' time. So all you have to do is wait. Oh yeah, the wait system sucks in this game. First of all, there is no actual wait system. They got rid of the ability to wait. You have to go find a goddamn chair or bench to wait. Or just go onto your ship and sleep there. So they added an extra bit of padding, because of course they did, in order to wait. Also, waiting itself is one of the slowest, sloggiest things ever. It takes several real-life minutes to wait a day. Okay. You know what? Obviously the problem is with me. I'm trying to get money. I tried to just store my stuff, but maybe that's just me being a pack rat. I tried to, to lock away all my stuff in order to turn it into crafting, but maybe I just shouldn't engage with those mechanisms. I tried to turn it into a money, but what do you need money for in a BRPG? Money's useless in a BRPG. So remember that thought I asked you to hold on to? The ships? Because ships are expensive. Ships are a gargantuan money sink in this game. To the point where it's actually kind of crazy how expensive they are. It takes real effort and real work and forethought to actually generate the amount of money to keep your ship up to date the way the game essentially needs you to. Now, even that is only kind of bad. You notice this is a trend. Each one of these points individually, by itself, in a vacuum, is only a little bit bad. It's not mega bad. It's like, oh well, you can't have an awesome ship. Whoop-de-doo. But it's really easy for your ship to fall behind, because the level scaling applies to both the ground combat and your ships. And as usual, each level that a ship gets, it levels universally. Whereas each level you get, you may have enough money to buy an upgrade for your ship, one. Whereas the enemy ships are getting an upgrade in every system. Do you see the problem here? Now, there are ways to glitch out and bug out the system to avoid that. I used one myself, leaning on particle beams. Another way you can do is you can make the donut ship, or make the U ship. But when you have to use a gun that is demonstrably broken and badly designed, or literally bug out a fundamental mechanism of the game in order to bypass the garbage mechanic, something's wrong. And keep in mind, you also probably want to have that extra storage, which costs even more money, in order to be able to get the items to store, to eventually be able to sell, in order to get the extra money necessary to actually upgrade your ship, to be able to keep up with the combat. Also, the shipbuilder's pretty legit. It's actually one of the better parts of the game. It's still got a lot of issues. You can't save blueprints. And there's no bank. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say I should have brought models out here. Let's say I've got two ships, okay? So I've got my DS ship right here. And I got my 3DS ship, okay? And the 3DS ship has a particle rifle that I want to put over on the DS ship. So logically, I should be able to just pull that off the 3DS ship, switch over to this ship, and put it on, right? Wrong. Because this game was coded by monkeys who don't understand anything other than base level, surface, menu level interaction. So what happens, in actuality, is you get rid of the gun here, which means you sell it back to the vendor for a pittance of what it cost, and then you switch over to this ship and buy the new gun, brand spanking new, more money cost. And you see how these systems really start to run into each other. Every single one of these minor complaints just bangs and bangs on the inside of this goddamn metal drum until it's this cacophony of bad game design. Virtually every single... I'm actually going to stop here because I could keep going. We went down a rabbit hole of how many different interlocking systems just connected to the stamina bar there are. I could keep going about just how many of these decisions make so many of the other decisions in the game worse. And it reverberates. It reverberates in this hellscape of bad game design. Let's talk about fast travel. I already kind of talked about fast travel, but one thing I didn't mention is that the game apparently has no idea what fast travel means. So let's say you're on a planet and you get a quest to go to another planet on another planet, like planet side. So you pull up your quest log and you hit travel to location, and then you're on the other planet. Okay, cool. That's exactly what should happen. But that's not always what does happen. Sometimes you click go to other planet and it says, well, hang on, do you want to set a course to that system? And you say, yeah. It's like, okay. And then you'll set a course to the system, and then you'll end up in space over the system. Sometimes there's a contraband check, not always. Like, okay, I go to land on the planet now. Okay, and then you pull up the map, click down, and hit the exact same button to do the exact same fast travel to then land on the planet. Because there's no land on planet button. There's fast travel down to planet from ship. It's the same mechanism. Hang on, it gets worse. Because there's a fuel system in this game, kind of. It's vestigial. It was left over from a previous design. But it kind of doesn't exist. But the way this works is you have enough fuel to get to systems that you have already explored one hop away. But if you want to go 2 hops away, it's like, nah, you can't do it. So let me describe this very clearly. So if you want to go from point A to B to C, and you try to fast travel to C, it will say no. The mechanism of this, I want you to understand the core gameplay of this is pull up, quest log, warp to spot, can't do it. Okay, so then you, in the map, click the nearby star, warp to there, then you pull up your quest log, hit warp to C, and then you warp to C. Fuel constraints satisfied. There's other specific nuances of how any given fast travel can work. It's kind of crazy how many different ways fast travel can work. And sometimes it's just one loading screen, and sometimes it's 2, and sometimes it's 3, and sometimes it's 4, and you get the idea. Do you know you can go exploring in this game? You just plop down on a planet, go running, find stuff. I actually did that. I actually did 100% explore. of one planet just to see what it felt like. Now, there's no vehicle, so you're left just running around on foot. So that's cool. But the really strange part is the procedurally generated terrain, which is boring as hell to look at, by the way. It doesn't have much there other than the obvious points of interest. And there's no, like, getting in your ship and landing closer. And there's no, like, just warping. Well, okay, let me actually walk that back. On some planets, you actually can land closer to point of interest. It doesn't always let you. It's right, because nothing's consistent in this goddamn game. But sometimes, you just have to walk there. And you do, and you get all the scanning and all the exploration, and Wong, you've explored the planet 100%. Yes. In Oblivion, Morrowind, and Fallout 3, and I would be willing to say Skyrim as well, there was always some kind of benefit to just picking a direction and walking, right? There's usually stuff there. Either something interesting to see, or a dungeon, or a side quest, or an event, or whatever. Fallout 3 added the, I actually don't remember what they call it. It's the Freaks system in GTA 5, and Red Dead Redemption 2, and technically GTA 4. It's random events. You enter a cell on the map, and in that cell's the wrong word, excuse me, you enter a block on the map. You enter a coordinate, and within that area, it will say, okay, this is the list of random events that can spawn there. And it will pull one of those and say, here's your random event. It's just something to do. Fallout 3 is actually really good about this. None of that is in this game. There's no reason to just pick a direction and go, especially since the overwhelming majority of the areas you could do that in are the random planets, not the planets with actual quests and content on them. If you decide to just walk over the walls of New Atlantis or Aquila City and just run a direction, you will find the same empty terrain on every other planet till you run into the wall. Of course, there is an invisible wall, at which point you can't go any further. But I'm still not at the actual complaint point here, because the actual complaint point is the fact that every planet you explore bogs down your save. Now, that's kind of normal for BRPG, especially one by Bethesda, where, you know, the more stuff you do, the more bloated your save gets, the worse the load time gets. That's semi-normal. But because there's so much stuff to explore in a game all about exploring, and there are literally hundreds of planets you could go explore, you can reach some truly epic levels of save bloat, to the point where you have to spend minutes on load times. Let's talk about how the game controls really badly. I'm not smart enough, or well-learned enough, or alive enough to actually discuss why this game controls badly, because I'm not actually sure. I can only give you my analysis based on speculation and observation. I do not know what's wrong with this game's controls, but let me tell you something. I was playing this game for several days, and I started doing this thing earlier this very week, where I started playing out other games, and I started playing other games to do direct contrasts. I find that immediate comparisons is very useful. And I opened up Doom Eternal. And obviously you're going to say, it's unfair. And yeah, it kind of is. But that's not the point. I was using that to describe encounter design and enemy design. But what I inadvertently did was I realized how bad the aiming was in this game. Because it's awful. But again, I'm not even sure why. It's just the aim is wrong. What you're aiming at is wrong. And it wasn't until I played an actual FPS, Doom Eternal, that I realized how different it was, jarring for me, to go from having to kind of adjust my aim every time I shoot something to aiming at something and shooting it, which is what Doom Eternal does. I'm not sure what exactly the problem is there, but a lot of the controls in this game control in a similar manner, where it's just a little bit off, you know? There's just a little bit of a delay or an awkwardness to it. I have a theory, though. So first of all, the creation engine sucks, as it always has. The idea that they keep adhering to this engine is one of the dumbest goddamn things about this company. I really do believe there's a lot of pride built into that. That they have not understood one of the most fundamental human lessons that exist, and that is the lesson of failure. I do not say this unkindly. It's something we have to learn as children, preferably, but also something we still have to keep learning as we grow up. We fail. We're people. That's how that works. Being able to accept that failure, acknowledge it, and move on from it, learn from it, grow from it. We can't do better if we don't already know we did bad. And I think that the Bethesda devs, at least the core design team, or the head design team, have yet to acknowledge that they have done bad. So this engine is a piece of trash. And it shows. God, it shows so hard. And my favorite little tidbit is that almost every aspect of control is just a little bit off, because what I think is happening is, rather than an action having an immediate reaction, I feel like what's happening is an action has to go through a script, which then leads to an action. Now, I'm describing that badly, so let me try this. How many of you played Warcraft 3? Nobody? Okay. Well, it's okay. You can't play it anymore. But I'm using Warcraft 3 as a specific example because I can point to a specific thing here. Warcraft 3 is an extraordinarily precise game with a very strong netcode. That means if I right-click the mouse button, it's an instantaneous, immediate, and precise reaction. Units move to there, or units attack there, or units... You get it, right? It's instantaneous reaction. It's the engine designed to interact with a certain input. Make sense? But Warcraft 3 also comes with extensive scripting, as well as an insane map editor. And there was a racing map that they built in that, where you're like, the camera gets behind your unit, and you're like, and you could like hit 1 or 3 to like, to use your abilities in order to steer the car. But the engine doesn't support that. So instead, what they did is there's a script. What they did was they designed it so that they gave the unit, your unit, custom abilities that don't actually do anything. And one of those abilities is called turn left, and the ability is called turn right. And once you cast turn left, there's a script they have running in the background. Anytime turn left is cast, take target unit owned by central player and adjust heading, left 30 degrees or whatever. And then reset script. Same thing with the right in the reverse direction. And that's how they managed to make it so you could steer a car. And that's very cool and very inventive and very clever. But it's awkward and janky, and it doesn't quite control right because you're not actually controlling the car. You have brute forced the engine to do something it was not designed to do. And I hope that brings us back into focus with what I believe is happening everywhere in this game. There are so many elements of this game that it feels like the engine just does not know how to deal with. We all know that they didn't even include mechs in this game when they absolutely should have. How long do you think it took them banging their heads up against the walls to try and even get that working? So the game doesn't control great on top of everything else. This is a good time to talk about guns. I mentioned the Doom Eternal comparison. Combat in any game that has a lot of combat needs to pop. Otherwise, it's Planescape Torment. I know what you're going to say. Oh, it's a great game. No, it's not. It's a great story. Planescape Torment has a great story. Tell me with a straight face you like that game's combat. So instead, this is no Planescape Torment. Instead, the guns in this game feel like you've got a super soaker and you're just squeezing the trigger every now and again. We actually, obviously, some people made fun of every time I made this game. They're like, oh, you're just using cutting beam. For those of you curious, we ended up using a cutter build. This was a good decision. I actually think that was absolutely the right call. Problem is, those people tend to forget that we used a whole lot of other guns before we got there. Pretty much all of them. How many of you have played Wolfenstein 3D, the original? I'm going to tell you a story really quick. I was a kid. I would have been about 10-ish, I want to say. So pretty young. And I was at my dad's boss's house. And Dad plopped me down in front of the computer so he could leave me alone and go deal with work stuff with his boss. I stopped down and I played Wolfenstein 3D. Now, I happened to be playing an existing save, whatever the guy's save was. And one of the first things that happened was I found the freaking Gatling gun. Do you remember what that felt like? What it sounded like? and how much impact it had. The topic I usually refer to as viscerality is 3 spokes. How it looks, how it sounds, how it feels. All 3 of these should be good, but most games manage at least one. I have never reviewed a game that fails at all 3 to the extent that Starfield does. The guns don't feel like you're doing anything. There's barely any impact, barely any reaction to the shots. I went back to Doom Eternal for a bit when I was discussing this, and showed off how enemies would react to shots. How there was an impact to it. How if you got a headshot, they'd just fall over, or their head would be blown off, or whatever. I'm not asking for gore or giblets. I'm asking for the gunplay, which is your primary gameplay mechanism in this game, to feel worth a damn. They also don't sound good. We actually had to turn the sound down on that, but all the sound effects are just wet bubbles. Just bzzz. Like it's nothing. It's complete nothing burners. And they don't look good. None of them look impactful. None of them have satisfying animations for reloading or shooting, and none of the actual shots themselves are interesting. The gunplay is anemic at best. Which, of course, is a good time as I need to talk about the Essential Flag. Now, the Essential Flag has existed since Oblivion. It can go straight to hell, right? Actually, as I talked about on stream, there are legitimate and valuable reasons to have an Essential Flag in your game. But the problem is, as always, execution. It's what you do with it that matters. Sorry for the repetition, but it's what you do with it that matters, Starfield. So they decided to use the Essential Flag every goddamn where. It is slathered over this game. And that's already really irritating, especially in cases where it arguably shouldn't. Frankly, if you just took away the gun mechanism, which, by the way, is a thing you can do in this game, they can prevent you from pulling out your gun. They can do that. It's a flag. So if they just did that when you're in town, that would bother me a lot less than, oh, I've got to sneak behind this person, kill this person. Oh, they're essential. But it actually gets worse than that, because there's something that I'm now going to refer to henceforth as the kid flag. So named after Skyrim. Thanks for that, Skyrim. The kid flag is actually worse than the essential flag. It's like the kid saying, "Nuh-uh, I've got a anti whatever you're using force field. You can't touch me." Because the kid flag, an essential flagged NPC will take damage and then fall over and then get back up after a period of time. This has been true all the way since Oblivion. A kid flag acts like you're not shooting them at all. In fact, as I demonstrated in this game, if I shot someone with a kid flag, I could point to the bullet holes behind them. They literally don't exist as far as the combat mechanism is concerned. The kid flag is another thing that I would only be very, 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 very careful and precise about its utilization. They use it all the time in this game. Constantly. This is a good time as any to mention. The game doesn't acknowledge anything you're doing. I have a concept I call consequence storytelling. But there's a related consequence storytelling is exactly what it sounds like. You know, something happens and then there are consequences from it. But there's a similar reaction to consequence gameplay. We as players, we want feedback. And this game has a huge lack of feedback problem. There was a point where I walked into the lodge and I was talking to my fellow NPCs, my fellow Constellation members, and I beat one of the characters to death in front of everybody. She just stood there, staring at me while I beat her to death. Nobody reacted. Nobody said anything. She fell over, essential flagged, of course. Got back up. Nothing. No change. No reaction. Nothing. Now, that is an extreme example, but I think it encapsulates the near total lack of feedback this game it lives and breathes. There is no design cohesion to this game, narratively or gameplay-wise. I'm going to talk primarily narratively now, I think. Because this game, one of the most often repeated memes about this game is that I had no central design document. Now, to be clear, near as I can tell, that's not actually true. In fact, I actually bothered to watch the entire 1 hour podcast, or 1 hour 50, whatever it was, over an hour podcast, where they were It was the Fallout 76 guy, and he was interviewing each of the devs. It was actually interviewing them about, just BRPG stuff in general. But this was something that was about 2 months before Starfield came out. And I watched the whole thing. And the quote that everyone's been quoting is Emil saying, a central design document doesn't make a good game. Which, yeah, of course it doesn't. That's stupid. But he was actually responding to something that the other guy said, and I'm sorry, forgive me for not remembering his name, but the other guy was the one who actually said, because the question that was asked of the devs was, if you could go back and tell your younger self something, what would you do? And the other guy's response was, don't think you can go down a checklist and that will make your game good. And that's when Emil responded saying, yes, the central design document doesn't make it good. And that's where that whole thing comes from, is that context. Now, I'm telling you this because I guarantee you that this game had no actual real central design document. Whatever you want to call it, whether it's a wiki, or whether it's just a person, like a mainliner, a central director, one might even say. It doesn't matter, because there is no cohesion to this game at all, either on the gameplay axis or in the narrative. Projects in general need cohesion. You need someone or something keeping track of everything. Otherwise, you have a bunch of people just throwing things into a pile, which is a pretty good description of this game, actually. And it's so clear they did not have that in this game. Ostensibly, Todd Howard himself should be the mainliner for this project. He's the one who everything should go through, the central through point for which everything else goes in and goes out of, the bus, right? Near as I could tell, he either is extremely bad at his job or didn't do it at all. This is a setting in which they have interstellar wars, and yet the capital city of one of those powers is a little podunk western town that doesn't even have roads. This is a setting in which Earth was destroyed and yet has so little impact on everyone that a mere 100 years later, I think it's 127 years later, people don't even think Earth even exists. This is a setting, and the destruction of Earth, which should be a big setting-changing thing, has no impact on anything. This is a setting in which it wants so desperately to be like this gritty, down-to-earth, survival kind of Star Wars lived-in feel, but also this bright, cheery, happening, but also this kind of Western sort of thing, but also cyberpunk. There's literally a Netrunner in this game. I cannot go down the list. That's what the stream is for. This is a summary. Nothing fits with anything else. In many cases, it doesn't fit with anything else in the same quest line. I called it child storytelling during the stream because I have 3 adorable nieces, and they're amazing and they're wonderful, and I love them dearly. One of my favorite things is to listen to them tell stories, because it's very chain of thought, right? Flow of thought, right? It's just whatever's coming to their mind. And what tends to happen is they'll introduce an element, like, oh, there's a shark, and it's gonna fly into the sky, and once it's done walking across the way, it's going to go and jump over into the water so it can fly into the sky. And you could tell that they have forgotten the story beats they just told you about. And that's understandable, because she's 4. But this game demonstrably, and I have video evidence of this, I streamed the whole goddamn game. This game has multiple times in multiple quest chains where they will forget plot points or completely invalidate or ignore plot points they just brought up seconds or minutes prior in the same quest chain, as if they just forgot they even existed. That is the level of inconsistency that I am talking about. I'm not just talking about the big setting stuff or the individual flavor stuff, but even down to actual plot points and characterizations. We actually didn't do all the secondary quests. We didn't do the whole game. I wrote it down. We spent 22.05 hours doing nothing but secondary quests. Real quick terminology thing. I usually divide content in a video game into 3 categories: MSQ, Prime Opt, and secondary. MSQ is the main story quest. It's the stuff the game intends to be mandatory to go through the game. Primary optional Prime Opt. That's the stuff, that's the real meat, right? The stuff that they clearly have spent a lot of time and effort on, and they want you to. Secondary is the little side stuff, exactly what it sounds like. So we spent 22 hours, 0.05, doing nothing but secondary quests. And they were all so vacuous and so bad, I legitimately started to think that they were procedurally generated. Not on the fly. Not like Radiant quests. I mean that when they designed them, they wrote out a brief outline of story, and then they had a bot design the actual gameplay of the quest in question. They were, I know that we talk a lot about X of Y, but as any good game designer will tell you, X of Y is a fundamental principle of quest design. It's what you do with it, I know I keep repeating myself, that really matters. Good, creative, talented quests, in quest designers, in good, creative, fun games can take an X of Y quest and make it fantastic. That is not this game. You're probably wondering, is there anything good about this game? Actually, what's really weird is, yeah, this game could have scored even worse than it did. The brickwork is good. There's a couple of good individual quests. The doodads are really good. Whoever, oh God, someone commented in the VOD about who it was, and I want to name drop it. I'm just gonna pull it up. Whoever designed the doodads, though, did a very, very, very good job of making the indoors of most areas look extremely good. Of looking so good that I can absolutely believe that that's a real place. The detailing, the positioning, everything it's crazy good. I'm sorry, give me a second here. Just a second, please. Here it is. Eleonora, a well-known modder that made many player homes in Skyrim and Fallout 4, who was hired by the Bethesda. There you go. Thanks to Gamer Nation Techno on that one. The doodad design in this game is some of the best I've ever seen, ever. It single-handedly dragged the story score up from Drek. And like I said, there's actually some individual quests which are pretty good. I'll give you a specific example. It's a bit of a spoiler, but there's a quest where you've just joined the Fighters Guild. I mean, the Vanguard. And they're like, all right, so what you're going to do is you're going to run around, you're going to help a bunch of random people with a bunch of random issues. It's probably, there's going to be some combat, usually against locals or spacers, raiders, or, just whatever, monsters, beasts. But you're going to go and you're going to help with little issues, and you're going to help keep the colony safe. And it's like, cool, awesome. So first thing I got you to do is you got to go repair this radar dish. No problem. And you land, and it's storming and dark. And there's nobody there who is currently alive. You hear a scream in the distance. There's blood everywhere. There's corpses. There's claw marks. And then you find one survivor who's like, oh my God, it's a freaking terramorph. And I'm like, what's a terramorph? Well, it turns out they're bad. And then the whole quest is all, it breathes, it oozes this wonderful dread. We talked about that on stream. I don't like horror stuff. But when I say horror, I mean like Silent Hill 2. That's horror. I like dread. I like Metroid, right? Pun not intended. I like Half-Life, right? I like Assassin's Creed. I like dread. And so this whole quest chain just oozed that kind of atmosphere, that kind of tension. And it all culminated in a boss fight against something that was way above my pay grade. Way above what I could take down by myself. But it's okay, because the quest was well designed. It actually had like these local defenses that you could run around and activate, and kill zones you could drag the thing into and to kill it with the turrets. It was a good, fun, intense, interesting quest, narratively and gameplay-wise. I was shocked, because that was like 30 or 40 hours into the game when we first stumbled into that quest. There are individual good quests like that throughout the course of this game. There's the rest of it. Like everything to do with the Crimson Fleet. Oh my God, I don't even know where to start with that. Gameplay positives. The music's pretty good. The final reunion mission, the stealth mission, is actually quite well designed. There's multiple vectors to get through the base. There's multiple vectors to get into the base. Once you're in, you have tools that have been given to you to help you stealth. And also, there are things you could do to change the environment. You can also just kill your way through if you want to. Oh, and if you set off the alarm, there's actually a way to turn the alarm right back off. A lot of options, a lot of routes, a good Thief-style mission. Not Thief the game, Thief the concept. Something Oblivion was very good at as well. Good stuff. There are good quests. There are good moments. And then there's everything else. If I haven't made my point as thoroughly as I possibly can by now, I want you to understand just how much I do not like this game. But this is the final point. This is the final point I'm going to make. Because I can just go down the list. I'm actually staring at my review document right now. It's huge. 96 gameplay negatives. Enough said. But I want to say something weird. We all have our hills, right? We all have things that we care about personally and particularly, right? Not objectively. From a purely subjective perspective, that's something that really is important to us. So when something violates that hill, when something trespasses on that hill, that tends to offend us. It tends to bother us in a way more than just something elsewise, right? I bet you dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions of people look at Starfield and say, oh, that's a bad game. And that's the end of that sentence. And that's fine, because I do that too. But Starfield violates a hill for me to such a severe degree that I've never seen before, with the exception of early MMOs. Even as far back as when I was a kid, playing JRPGs on my NES and on my SNES, I have been vitriolically against the idea that longer games are better. You've probably heard me talk about this because this has been a hill for me since I was in the single digits. So this is something that is a big deal to me and has been forever. And games violate it constantly. The number of games that try to artificially pad out their experience to make the game runtime longer, to make the game be perceived as better, is huge. It is extraordinarily rare that you'll see a game that is willing to be as long as it should be. Note that I say as long as it should be, because the length isn't really the problem. As I demonstrated, there are, I think, 5 or 6 games we've reviewed that are longer than this game. And all of them scored better. But the padding isn't about the length, it's about the padding. It's about artificially inflating your game's length to make the game longer, not better. Elden Ring was like an 80-hour game when we played through it. Of course, we did all bosses, but of course we did, right? Still, is Elden Ring padded? It did have a little bit of padding, but no, of course it wasn't. That was 80 hours of content. This was a 71-hour game of padding. And this is my final thoughts on this game. If you've stuck with me all this time, as my voice slowly dies, thank you, I appreciate you. This game is offensive to me. This game is the antithesis of that concept. Every single element of this game is stretched and stretched and stretched. There are seconds and minutes problems absolutely everywhere in this game, to a ludicrous degree. In terms of animations, in terms of enemy health, in terms of walk speed, in terms of quest design. There's something called a walk and talk. It's a common form of cutscene design. We've seen this in Half-Life, we've seen this in Half-Life 2, we've seen this in Oblivion and Fallout 3. It's when the NPC walks and talks as they go on the way, and then you get there and then something else happens, right? This game abuses walk and talks constantly. And worse, it does so in ways that make the whole cutscene take longer than it should, because it's padded. You'll have a cutscene, and then a walk and talk, and then a cutscene. Everything about this game is so goddamn padded that I find it legitimately offensive. And Here's the final little amusement. Right at the end here, this is not scripted, because as I was looking down the document just now, I noticed a small error. Which means I actually need to add more negatives to this game, because I made a note to do that later, and I skipped over it over the audit. So the score is about to go down. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate you. Do not buy this game.